So Coach Black and Blue Pill called me out. He wanted me to do a stream with him, and I told him privately that no, you're a clown, and I was happy to just leave it at that. But he wanted to make a big stink about it.
I wanted to know why on Twitter you call me a clown.
Oh, I called you that in a deep...
Just a little background for the people, because that's part of the reason I want to be on this stream here. Because a while back you and I were in touch, and I thought it was very friendly, by Twitter DM, and I think maybe via Skype. And then all out of the blue,
this is like a chat show about current affairs. It's not about a personality war.
I figured the pick your battles man would just move on, but I guess not. Unless I get accused of straw manning, I'll just let Coach Blackpill speak for himself.
Frankly, I think that it's over for Europe. The Western democracies are going to be run by the Islamic population. Western culture will be overrun by Muslim culture, and eventually there will be some sort of European caliphate. And there's no solution to this problem. The Western Europeans, they are an exhausted race, but it's going to be Muslim. They are the more energetic population. They are more vital. They have more life force. A Muslim is a man.
Prepare for battle!
Well, who could argue with such a rousing speech? Now, I just did a cursory glance at some racial demographic data in the UK, which is definitely worse than the whole of Europe. And so I looked at the race of births by age group. The age 0 to 4 group has 77.54% of the births in the UK, and you could see a decline by each age group. And it's bad. But look, if this rate continues apace, whites will be a minority of births in 2052. But that's just if this rate continues. I found some data on fertility rates in the UK, and for whites, both UK and foreign born, the fertility rate of non-whites in the UK, doing a weighted average for 2011, was 2.06. Non-whites, all told, are slightly below replacement in the UK. Moreover, the white fertility is stable, whereas every ethnic group besides blacks from Africa has been decreasing. In the United States, I actually found data on fertility by political leaning and found that conservative whites outbred everyone except Hispanics. However, if the trends are projected to today, conservative whites should be outbreeding native-born Hispanics in 2017. But I don't have any data on that to know for sure. And so when we compare US to UK white fertility, and then conservative US white to all US white, we can then say, maybe, I don't know. But it's just another factor that could make the situation in the UK less desperate than it might appear at first glance. Less desperate, not good. In addition, at least according to the 2014 British Social Survey, people in the UK born outside Europe are actually less likely to support high levels of immigration than either UK immigrants from Europe, i.e. white people from the EU, or native-born whites in the UK. Immigrants are more anti-immigration than the native-born UKers, and brown people are more anti-immigration than white people within the UK. On top of that, 77% of the UK population wants immigration reduced at least a little, and 56% say they want it reduced a lot. And ethnics in the UK are slightly more likely to support reduced immigration than the white British are. Looking at the whole of Europe, Pew says that, based on current projections, in 2050, Europe will be 85% Christian or atheist. So let's account for some black Christians and a few Arab atheists, and that's going to be like, what, around 80% white? Not good, but not a completely impossible situation that we couldn't turn around. Now look, these numbers are bad. We are on the clock, but to say it's over when Britain is something like 83% white and something like 74% of the children in 2016 and 2017 are going to be white, the majority of the population wants a reduction in immigration, including the non-whites in Britain who want a reduction in immigration. To say that this is an impossible situation, that is very foolish. If people think it's all hopeless, they turn inward and don't engage in activism, because what's the point? I remember talking to Trump Trumpists who said they wouldn't vote because they thought the election was hopeless. Thank God those that voted did, but how many Trump votes were suppressed by the poll gaslighting? But one thing I found kind of icky was when Coach referred to Muslims as more vital and more manly. Well, they're more likely to end up in prison. Adjusted for age, they're more likely to be obese. They're less likely to work, and they're more likely to be on the dole, or those kind of go together. And they watch 50% more TV than whites do. They're more likely to marry outside of their race than whites are. They're more likely to race mix. They have less racial solidarity than whites, despite all the conditioning that whites have had. But they have more kids. By every other measure, they're less vital than whites, but they have more kids. And I know that brown Caucasians are shorter and have less muscle mass than European Caucasians. What I think Mr. Coach is doing is just putting a negative filter on things and calling that realism. It's not red-pilled, it's just a kind of uninformed pessimism. So that's the black pill. What blue pill does Mr. Coach have for us?
Is because they were formed by our history and by our genes and by our people, and that different people will not lead to the same results?
No, I think that it's the problem of Perseus' ship, Theseus' ship. The ship leaves Greece for, I don't know, Troy, right? And along the way, the ship, a mast gets broken, they change the mast, the wood here, the wood there, this anchor or whatever, everything gets changed on the ship by the end of its voyage. Question becomes, is it the same ship? Sure. If it's a little by little process where you have assimilation, real assimilation, immigrants who enter the country and become a member of the country and assume its cultural values and its cultural priorities, its societal framework, no problem. I don't have a problem with immigration per se.
Now, this is very common Dennis Prager style conservatism, and I think this is a good opportunity to get into an explanation involving genetic change in Europe, something I went into in an article entitled The European Revolution. Now, first, we see a collapse in the homicide rate among Europeans, but the collapse in homicide rate is most strongly felt and first felt in the UK, then in Benelux, then in Germany and Scandinavia, then in Italy. Eisner didn't have numbers for France, sadly, so we don't see when this happened for France, although France is probably bifurcated between the North and the South. But this roughly matches the time period of political changes in those countries and the rolling back of feudalism. Now, a paper by Vegard Skrbek in 2008 looked at fertility rates by socioeconomic status and found that the top 35.4% of the population replaced the bottom 64.6% of the population of Europe 2.3 times between 1250 and 1800. This is because the upper class had more descendants and they basically filled out the lower classes, and the lower classes, with their below replacement fertility, they were replaced by the upper classes. Skrbek documents this happening from 1250 to 1800. Gregory Clark talks about this specifically happening in the UK. Henry Harpending and Peter Frost wrote a paper entitled Western Europe, State Formation and Genetic Pacification, and they say from 1000 AD to 1750 AD, about 1.5% of the male population was executed for some sort of crime every generation. So every generation, the most criminal 1.5% of males are removed from the gene pool. Then the genes get mixed again and again. The most criminal 1.5% of males are pulled out of the genetic tumbler. And then they're mixed again, and the most criminal 1.5% are pulled out. How powerful would this effect be after 30 of these recombinations? Well, just think if you killed the 45% most criminal people in the male population today. You took the top 45% people who are the most criminal. Almost half the males would be killed. That would probably reduce crime in the next generation by at least half. Certainly, intuitively, that would have a big effect. I don't know for sure exactly what the effect would be, but it would be a staggering reduction in crime if you just chopped off the most criminal 45% of the male population. But if you were to, instead of chopping off the top 45% at once, you were to chop off the top 1.5% over 30 generations, that's going to have even more of an effect on reducing criminal genes than if you had just killed the top 45% most criminal in a single slice. Because since it's the top 1.5% most criminal, you're cutting out a higher threshold of criminality each time. So even though 1.5% 30 times adds up to 45%, you're actually getting a higher concentration of criminal genes because you're getting the most criminal concentrations each time. And these time periods in which the double replacement of the lower classes and the war on murder was occurring, this is when Europe, as we know it, started to come into existence. The end of feudalism, the rise of representative government, and most importantly, the rise of a common market and mass production, which led to the Industrial Revolution. In my article, I call all of this the European Revolution that stems from a genetic change. Now, Coach Blue Pill just has circumstance and will. I don't know what all his explanations are. One of them is Christianity. I know the Christianity explanation as a factor would get all complicated and would have to explain why the Christianity just started to kick in around 1700, but from 380 to 1500 AD, Europe being as poor as everywhere else, that would have to be explained, and why Christianity doesn't seem to help blacks, and why Eastern Europe is poorer than Western Europe, and maybe he'll say it had to do with the Church of Constantinople being different from the Church of Rome, or maybe it has to do with the Muslim incursions in Russia. I don't know what his annoying little cargo cult explanations for European exceptionalism are going to be. But here's what I'm not doing. I'm not doing that thing anymore where I do a whole bunch of work to falsify a proposition before the other guy has even begun to evidence it. I'm not doing that anymore. He's proposing a circumstantial explanation. Well, he can go do the work to show it. And maybe Coach will be different from all the soothsayers and storytellers who just proclaim institutions as though institutions weren't created by people with genes. Now, let's say you have the white people and the brown people. The white people work hard and farm before winter and store the food. And the brown people, they just do enough to get by, and then they all starve during the winter. Now, if someone asks, why did all the brown people die? Coach could say, it's because they didn't store food to survive the winter. And this would be a true explanation, but also a stupid explanation. Yes, we know they didn't store food. Why didn't they store food? Yes, we know the Arabs and Africans developed totally different institutions. Why? Why are they still this way? Then you can say, oh, they didn't develop the same institutions as Europeans because of their culture. Well, golly, where did that culture come from? Are males more violent than females because male culture is more violent? That's right. Let's get away from this sort of blue-pilled cargo cult thinking. I think Coach's black and blue pills actually reinforce each other. The level of propaganda and institutional force against white nationalism would have destroyed any ideology. But white nationalism won't die because it's in the genes. It's not something taught. And I think Mr. Coach's black-pilled view of things in Europe is actually an extension of his blue-pilled view of human behavior and belief. Since Coach sees the West as a product of circumstance and will, not of a biological substrate, he's looking at things in terms of a kind of synthetic ideological support for Western values. And if that's all this was, then yes, Coach would be absolutely correct. The situation would be totally hopeless. But when you realize that Western values is just an expression of European genetics west of the Hanau line and to a substantial degree east of it as well, then you realize it's not something that can be totally conditioned away. And thus the situation is never hopeless because the genes are always there. Now, I'm glad that in practice, Coach is against non-European immigration, but he's just a guy that says things. Now, maybe I shouldn't have called him a clown because he's probably better than like 90% of people. But if I did a stream with him, I would just be bored and I would get mad when he would just say things like, it's not race, it's culture. They just need to be assimilated. Theseus's ship, whatever. Or the UK is over. It's totally over. No chance. Stick a fork in it. Sing the funeral dirge for it. Or the Catholic Church is what made Europe great or something. Look, these black pills and blue pills, these are things I have to deal with when talking to anti-whites all the time. I don't want to have to waste time doing that with Coach, especially since he's a man who knows everything and is super thin-skinned. So I think I'll just end this video with a little bit of advice for him.
It is easy to sort of like wind up going after every little thing that crosses your path for no benefit to myself. Don't make my mistake. Pick your battle. And in any battle, in any engagement, know exactly how you are going to win. What advantage will he gain by supposedly winning in this battle? When you decide on a battle, you have to ask yourself, what am I going to get out of this? You have a limited number of fights in you. Make them count.